Okay, so it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. Robert Hennings, who is the director of Santa Rosa Academy, where my kids actually go to school. Started there last year, correct?
Yeah, May 1st.
And he's married, and for some of you already heard that his wife was one of my professors at Azusa Pacific University, where she's an adjunct professor, and Dr. Hennings is sometimes an adjunct professor there. They have two kids, 14 and 11, and they have a busy family schedule. It looks like with swim team, ballet, karate, church activities, just some of the things that they do. And they're long-standing supporters of public charter schools, charter-based homeschooling, independent study, and academy-based programs. Both of their kids have attended public charter schools and have had great experiences. My kids are having a great experience at Santa Rosa Academy, just speaking for my family. And they're a family that's committed to meaningful education that's high quality. And they're advocates for parent choices and determining the best education options for their kids. And Dr. Hennings has served students, staff, and families in traditional and charter public education to a variety of roles, including teacher, coach, school counselor, programs coordinator, principal, schools director, assistant superintendent, and now executive director. So with that, the floor is yours, Dr. Hennings.
Well, thank you. I'd like to thank Gunnery Sergeant John Grimm for inviting me to meet with you today. It's an honor to be here. One of my earliest experiences with Rotarians was through the Colton chapter. As a high school student, they sponsored me with a scholarship for my community involvement through the local Future Farmers of America chapter. This morning, I'd like to walk us through the difference in charter schools and the educational pathways available to the children in our community. First, I'll touch on some background. For years, education struggled with what to do about kids who fell through the cracks, high school dropouts, low achievement, so forth. One of the responses in 1992 was to create a carve-out situation whereby some schools could operate in freedom of some of the stifling education code and local bureaucracy of the local school district. These schools came to be known as charter schools and were intended to be nimble centers of education that could adapt to what the community and the students needed in a faster manner. Historically, these charter schools have played an important role in public education as learning laboratories to test new approaches, practices, and theories. The idea was that these experiences could be shared in the field of education in general so that school districts could apply the lessons learned from these learning laboratories and help to improve public education overall. Since the inception of the charter movement in the state of California, the graduation rate here in California has risen from 64% in 1992 up to 84.5% statewide last year. While this isn't directly attributed to charters, much of the lessons that were learned from these learning labs have been generalized to a great many school districts, from learning pathways and academies to magnet schools to enrichment programs and to intensive intervention programs. All these things that were first tested out in charter schools and then applied in traditional school settings. The field of education has simply benefited greatly from the neighborhood competition of charters and the lessons learned that the charter schools have provided to the field. Many school districts across the state have worked hard to build and improve their own programs to better meet student need and to compete with the great performing neighborhood charter schools. Now, charter schools fall into two basic categories. There's non-classroom based independent study programs, and there's seat-based traditional programs. My program, for example, is a traditional seat-based. Today, charter schools cater to families in key niches. There's 4 key niches that you can find in our valley. One is online learning. There are some charter programs that are exclusively online. One in our area in particular is called Venture Online. That's offered through Springs Charter Schools. They provide subject teachers for each course, but all of the assignments and the meetings with the teachers are done online. Others have the bulk of student work managed online by a supervising teacher, but the day-to-day work is self-directed, more of like an independent study style. The second key niche that charters in our area serve is homeschooling. Now, most charter-based homeschool programs are independent study-based and have a supervising teacher check in with the family each week to monitor progress and provide guidance. However, some charter-based homeschool programs operate with the parent as the official teacher of record, and the teacher advisor checks in with them monthly to monitor progress. A third key niche that charters fulfill in our area is through just independent study. This approach basically sees a student receive work for a defined period of time. Then they meet with an independent study teacher, typically once a week, to check progress and to get assistance if they need it. This is also common with a credit recovery type independent study program, because the student is working at their own pace. They have the ability to accelerate their credit attainment so that they can, quote unquote, catch up. And finally, academies. Academies, they are traditional seat-based programs, but they focus on certain pathways. They center schooling around a theme, or they employ certain features about the school that the neighborhood schools just don't have. For example, at my school centered around character education and community service. And these aren't things that are typically found in a traditional neighborhood school. Traditional neighborhood schools serve an important role in providing for the educational welfare in their communities in mass. While this is absolutely fine for most, it does not best meet the needs for every student. Large-scale education is challenged simply to be able to adapt to meet the needs for niches of students who either do not fit into the large-scale mold, or whose families recognize that they would like for there to be a different option for their children. This is precisely where charters fit in. They cater to these niches. Perhaps it's a family wanting a dual language immersion program. Perhaps it's a family wanting an academy based in military science. Perhaps it's a school focused on performing in visual arts. Or perhaps it's a family seeking out a school that has a flexible school day, or a school that offers education in a homeschool environment. Whatever the niche, it's important that parents have protected choice to have good charters to serve them. That's what their children need of public education. Our region respects parent choice and parent involvement in education. This is true for the Murrieta, the Menifee, and the Temecula valleys. It shows because we are blessed with robust charter options, but we are also blessed with good performing neighborhood schools. The Temecula, Murrieta, and Menifee valleys have a wide variety of healthy charter school options. The local school districts in our area have been employing good practices and good options for students on a large scale. But our local school districts, they do have, I want to point this out, they do have a healthy relationship with the charter movement, and their performance in the state reflects the positive symbiotic relationship that was intended to come along with the charter movement. Some districts in the state regularly make the news for their massive perennial shortcomings, yet they advocate against great neighborhood charters where students are finding success. It's really sad. All across the state, we need to maintain healthy charter schools to continue to inspire educational reform and positive influence for kids. We need everyone's advocacy through the power of the vote to elect politicians who will help protect this movement and shield it from special interests representing the failing examples of public education. One of the challenges students in our region that I've observed over the years have to do with symptoms of affluence. There are four main areas that I've picked up on that our students could need help with. One, we see that there are fewer students are learning how to live as an adult, from managing their personal budget to planning for the future to just simply balancing responsibilities. Second, fewer students are breaking into the part-time job market. Third, students have a growing lack of community connectedness. Fewer students in the community service organizations. We're seeing fewer students in community sports, seeing fewer students involved with community volunteerism. And fourth, we see students living more and more in homebound existences, but yet at the same time, they live in this great big virtual world at the same time. Students are gravitating towards socializing online through digital media platforms. They're finding it easier to talk and connect through posts and texts instead of live conversation. Community service organizations and sports in the community are simply good medicine for students. More charter schools recognize this and build in community service to their programs to instill community-mindedness into the learning. When these service organizations, such as Rotarians, provide avenues for students to get involved in the community, it helps the students to connect with the community and to build awareness outside of their digital footprint. It also provides an opportunity for youth to learn to work with other adults in the community outside of the home and school. This is of growing importance since many students no longer factor into the part-time workforce, where traditionally important job skills and life lessons are learned. In this digital age of fast-paced living, our students need mentors and guides to help reinforce things like financial literacy, balancing responsibilities, and taking ownership in the community. I'd like to leave you with this thought. I know it sounds cliche, but raising kids definitely takes a village, from parents to schools to the local employer to church to community service. We all factor into helping to bring up our next generation. They need us more than ever today, but someday we will need them more than ever.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hennings, for all that information. And yes, as Rotarians, we also try to include our family members and our young, we have young kids within our Rotarians that we involve them. And that's our goal, to get them involved and see what service above self is. And let us know how you're more than welcome to have a group of kids to come and join us. And we do a bus bench cleaning at the end of the month. It's fun. We will keep you informed of the activities that we have, so you would have some kids get involved as well, or let them. We'll provide information of what we're all about as Rotarians.
Yeah, and I just can't stress enough the dilemma that we have going on. We literally have kids that can grow up in their same house, on their same street, and here it is, they're arriving in high school and they don't even know their neighbor's name.
Yeah.
And that's now spilling into our young adults, where people don't know their neighbors anymore. And if you don't know your neighbors, how can you possibly be connected in the community? There used to be a time and a place where, as a community, we took ownership of our community. We saw needs at the community park. We just stepped in and helped out. And now it's like we're a community of shut-ins, and it's only getting worse. And so that's why it was so important for a school like Santa Rosa that community mindedness is built into our curriculum starting at a young age, and we teach character values alongside with it. John, he's about to experience the community service projects on the largest scale, because his kids are getting ready to start working on their project soon. But to open them, the kids' minds into not only the benefit the community gets from their work, but also the benefit that they get personally from involving themselves and having influence. When I counseled students, I used to say, I'm in this more for me than I am for you, because of how good I feel by helping others. And that catches on with a lot of kids. They catch the bug of how good it makes them feel, and they like to see the smiles go on people's faces when the work that they put in elicited those smiles. And so our hope is that more schools gravitate toward building community connections through the school. But, we also need more people to get involved in community service organizations, because I think the only way for us to get back to having strong, close communities where we know our neighbors and we lend help to our neighbors is to build those connections. We can't keep going down this pathway where we don't know the person who we've been living next to for 10 years.
Exactly. Well, now we're going to open it for questions and answers. Would you please raise your hand? Frank let me unmute you, Frank. 1 second. John, would you unmute Frank, please? Thank you. Nope, not yet.
Just push the space bar, Frank.
Okay, do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I was wondering, is Santa Rosa doing regular students in the classroom, or doing everything remote now? Because I think it's so important. However we have to do it is to get the kids in the classroom, and so they can mingle with the other children. I mean, when you think about it, imagine having an education that you're on. Imagine if this went on and it caught on and people said, well, we don't need to have classroom instruction. It's easier to do the remote. How much they're lacking when you're not interacting with your fellow schoolmates and so on. So is Santa Rosa able to do their own thing and have the students back in school, or do they have to follow everything that the public school's doing?
Oh, yeah. We are a public school, so we do have to follow all of the mandates that are out there. The good news is that last week on Tuesday, Riverside County moved into the red color, and so that started a 14-day countdown to see if that status will hold. And if it holds, so we have 5 or 6 more days, then schools will be given the ability to decide if they can reopen their campus, but they'll only be allowed to reopen campuses at half capacity while the county is in that red color. So our next board meeting is October 15th, and we'll be presenting our reopening plan to the school board. If our school board gives approval, we'll be bringing kids back on campus at half capacity. So the gist of that is the only way to pull that off is if kids can come onto campus a couple of days a week. They basically come to school in shifts. And then when the county goes to the next color, I believe it's orange, then schools will have the ability to decide to reopen at full capacity. They'll still have to wear masks and things like that. But that can't come soon enough. You know, our kids really need it. I need it. And our teachers need it. The longer this has gone on, more of our teachers, they just want the kids to be there with them on the school campus. So that's the state of the affairs as of right now.
What happens if the county goes back to, the lower colors, where they're back in the pandemic? Do you end up with the kids in school and then you have to take them out and do the way we are now? I mean, that's kind of crazy if you're going back and forth.
Yeah, and that's a real concern because it doesn't take much to trigger a school closure under the new requirements. All it takes is for 5% of whoever it is you have on campus in a 14-day period to test COVID positive. If it does, you have to shut the school down for 2 weeks. So it's a very low threshold, and that's just out of our hands. So we are hopeful. There's some very positive news coming out of Florida. Florida's had schools open for weeks now, and they have not had to shut schools down because of outbreaks connected to the schools. So I think with more of those instances going on, there's building evidence that schools aren't the hot zones and that we need to worry about. COVID does not transmit wildly in schools is what they had initially feared. But that being said, it all comes down to, are the experts or the leaders in California going to give deference or pay attention to those reports? So far, California has decidedly been on the apprehensive side, very conservative approach when it comes to COVID. And we're one of the most locked down, states when it comes to our COVID response. There's plenty of states where the schools are opened up and they're not seeing, swaths of kids or teachers getting COVID because of being at school.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Marty had a question, and then we'll move on to Mr. James and Mr. Paul after Marty.
Okay, first I would like to know, I guess I missed it. Are you with the Temecula School District?
No, I'm with Santa Rosa Academy. It's over in Menifee, and we're an independent public charter school. We're authorized through Menifee Union.
Okay, Menifee. Okay, my daughter, one of my daughters homeschooled up to high school, and it was very successful. They were in scouting. They were in chorus, community chorus. They had a lot of opportunities for community service also. So it's not impossible, to do it remotely.
No, it's not. My daughter, she was homeschooled the last few years because of her medical issues, but there was a blessing to it. She had a flexible schedule. She was able to incorporate a lot more enrichment activity because she wasn't tied down to a traditional daily school schedule. My school also has a homeschool program, and that's one of the big attractions for our homeschool families is they like the ability to call audibles on any given school day. It's something might be in vogue in the news. It's like, hey, let's go down to the science center and check it out for ourselves, and then build
Absolutely.
a science lesson around it that day. You know, that kind of nimble education where you can just pivot on a dime, that's not something you can do in a traditional school setting. But if a parent has the time and the capacity to be able to homeschool, it can be a wonderful experience for kids.
Okay, my last question was about testing. I assume you're required to do all the testing that the regular public schools do.
Yes. Yep. All public charter schools are required to do all of the same mandated tests the traditional public schools have to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're moving on to Mr.
Mr. James had a question, wasn't it?
Can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes, yes. So first off, I will say Santa Rosa is a great school, and my family members who go there, the Bradwell family, attend, and my brother-in-law, he's one of your assistant, or not assistant, substitute teachers as well. So I always hear great things. And yes, I think one of the things you touched on in answering Frank's question is that charter schools are public schools, because I think that's a big misconception, and that they do have to follow many of those same guidelines that the school districts will, because they're chartered through a school district. So
Right.
they follow a lot of those things. And it really is, having that other option is so important, because as you pointed out earlier as well, having that competition is so valuable, because it makes everybody raise their game. It's the ultimate in accountability. If a parent's not satisfied with the education their child is receiving at one school, if they have the option to go someplace else, and that other school doesn't want to lose that student, then they're going to have to up their game a little bit. And I think it creates a better learning environment for everyone. And not everything is going to be a fit for every child, and so it's important for them to be able to find those thing that's going to work for their individual child. So sometimes it's going to be something else, and that needs to be okay. And we need to make sure we're voting to make sure that the funds follow the child. So that where the child is attending school, that's where the school funding needs to go. So I think that's important. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there, and Santa Rosa is a shining star in there as well. So yeah, I think Mr. Paul had a question as well.
Hello,
You're
hi.
going to move a little bit closer. There we go.
Hi, Mr. Paul here. You can't see me, but I'll try my best. So I wholeheartedly agree with your idea of we're stuck in a box and we can't go out of it, right? All the families can no longer call the neighbors, and I think social media has a lot to do with that. Has if anything, encouraged that kind of behavior. What are your thoughts on social media, especially with kids, as far as etiquette? How do you manage internet and so on and so forth? Do you limit their social media, or do you increase it with the idea that, like, go hang out with these kids, these are your neighbors, go out with them? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, social media for school administrators have become like the bane of their existence, because in this day and age, so much of the negative aspects of social media find their way into schools, like through cyberbullying or cyber stalking. We're a far cry from insulting people in person or teasing in person. That's all moved to, online digital platforms, and it only emboldens people to go further. They'll take more liberties with what they'll say or threaten online than they would in person. And so I think the kind of bullying or negative interactions that we see, not just with kids but with adults in general, it's gotten out of hand, because people have less filtering going on when they have this false sense of protection being on the other side of a screen. And I think social media has definitely contributed in a negative way to our devolvement as a society. We've become much more polarized in our reactions. There's definitely less dialogue and discussion taking place, just people trading shots from one sidewalk to another. And can we move away from that? I think we can, but it's going to take concerted effort over a long period of time where we educate our young people about social media etiquette, but at the same time, we really have to push the issue of being physically involved in the community and being out in the community, not living as a homebound shut-in. You know, I'm guilty of that, and this is pre-COVID. You know, we all go out to work, and then we all go to the safety of our own homes, and maybe we'll venture out to go shopping or to go catch a movie, to go to church, but we really don't just get out into the neighborhoods anymore. And so it's important that at a family level, we all teach that in our children. We have to go be out in the community and experience our neighbors, get to know our neighbors. And I think that's where the long-term change is going to happen.
James, do you have another question, or Mr. Paul? Let me see. Unmute yourself. Okay, there you go.
I just want to say thank you. And yes, I would love to think about the idea of like, how do we break away from that anonymity, the protection of anonymity,
or at least the perceived anonymity, anonymity of it.
Because that's, I think it could, I personally believe that social media could be a tool for educators, but you're right in the sense that like it opens up this avenue of like negative things happening to the children there. So yeah, I thank you so much for your question.
And it's not just the kids, it's adults too. I mean, gone are the days when, you know, if a parent or someone in the community had an issue with the school, gone are the days where they pick up the phone and call and talk to somebody or come to the school and, you know, and share what's bugging them. Now they'll just go to Facebook and, you know, throw a couple of, you know, grenades in the room and then log out. You know, that's how communication is taking place these days, and there's nothing positive about it. It encourages things to devolve into a mess.
Yes. Okay, before we move on, who do we have? Area code 845, last digit 706. Would you please let us know who you are? Unmute them, John.
They have to unmute themselves.
Okay, and then we have Andy joining us.
Andy Pasolini is Santa Rosa's Director of Community Relations.
Yes, good morning. I joined a little bit ago so I could just get a little glimpse of what's going on and then do a little, since you were talking about social media, I will be happy to do a little write-up about this morning, Dr. Hennings talking to you about charter schools.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you.
Were you going to share something with us? I'm sorry, I misunderstood you.
I'll be doing a post on social media for Santa Rosa, but I'll be happy to, excuse me, I'll be happy to give a shout out to all of you guys.
Well, thank you. And we are the Temecula Sunrise Rotary Club.
Yes, I have that information from Dr. Hennings' invitation.
Okay, and we will, it's being recorded, so we will upload it and it will be on our Facebook.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes.
I'll wait for that then.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andy, for joining us.
Pleasure.
Who else has a question? No silence? Okay.
I do, but it might be construed And, my wife was talking to a person the other day who is from England, and he was teaching his own kids about World War II, and because he lived through it, and all the sites they have over in England were the bombings and stuff like that, and so the kids go back to school, and this is in the Temecula, Murrieta area. I don't know exactly what school it was, but the teacher says, "Oh, we don't teach anything about World War II, and that the Holocaust never happened." I want to know, is that particular teacher, or she says, "We don't teach that, and the Holocaust never happened." I don't know if that was her own personal belief, or if it's something that the schools actually are teaching now. So that's my question to you, Mr. Hennings.
No, it's definitely still part of the curriculum. The Holocaust is one of the biggest reasons why history education is so important. Is so that mankind, we can learn from our tragedies and mistakes of the past, and it would be a travesty if World War II Holocaust education was ever omitted from the curriculum. So, yeah, that must have been the sentiment of the individual teacher, because it is still part of the history teaching standards in California.
Okay. I wanted to make sure, because my I have grandchildren. My father was was one of the troops that von Birkenau and liberated that concentration camp. So I think it would be a travesty if they're teaching kids that it never happened. That would just be a very sad thing, not being able to tell the truth. It is history, and if you don't pay attention to history, we're doomed to repeat itself. And it's looking, anyhow, I won't get into the political aspects of all that, but yeah, I just wanted to see that it's not, it could have been just the individual teacher, or maybe even that school. I don't know. I have no idea what school it is. So just want to make sure you're on the right track. Thank you very much.
Hey, Mark, find out who it is and what school it is, and we'll send a posse.
That's all I needed to do. I don't need to, but yeah, thank you very much. That's all I had.
Thank you, Jimmy.
I got about 4 million Jews that might disagree with you.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Jimmy,
quick questions. How's the funding from? And then does it have enough funding compared to traditional public school?
It's ironic that you bring that up, but recently there was a law passed, Senate Bill 98, and it was a backhanded swipe at the charter school movement. It was designed. It was ghostwritten by the California Teachers Association and designed as a way to prevent funds from going to schools with growing enrollment. Well, on the tail end of last year, the schools that were growing in enrollment were largely charter schools. And so, it was all done through the guise of, hey, we're going to provide, stable average daily attendance funding for schools and just freeze their funding at last year's levels. So for all of these charter schools that increased their enrollments on the tails end of last year, going forward, even my school, who I ended up netting an additional 170 some odd new students, I'm not going to get any funding for them this year. Wow. And that's okay. we still committed to those families, and so we still, had to hire some teachers to cover the increase of enrollment, but we're not going to get any compensation for those students this year. Now, there was a little fly in the ointment with that law. It also caught up school districts who were going through increasing enrollment, like Menifee Union and Murrieta. These are still growing districts, so it was harming them too. So they recently did a new law that as long as you are a traditional seat-based school, like a school district, it'll be okay. You'll go ahead and get funding for your increased enrollment. But if you are a non-classroom-based independent study program, which is what most charter programs are, you're still not going to get the increase in funding. So there are a few charters in the Temecula area that fall into that dilemma, and they did increase their enrollment quite a bit, and they're in a real pickle because they're having to spend down their financial reserves just to cover operational costs this year, and they're not getting funding for their increase of enrollment. Now, if this goes on for a second year, I don't know how some of the charters are going to be able to survive that. This year alone is going to be tough because in the spring, the months of February, March, April, and May, the state is doing something called deferments. It's just basically issuing IOUs to the schools. They're not going to give them the funding that they're supposed to receive. They're just going to issue these promises to pay in the future. And so schools have to dip into their own savings, their own reserves to, cover their operational costs. Now, schools like mine that have been in operation for quite some time and have had the opportunity to build up a robust savings, no sweat, we'll make it through. But if you're a newer charter or a smaller charter, it might be the death nail for you. It was just, it was a political scheme to, attack charters. Charters have been under attack for a few years now. CTA makes no qualms about it, that they wanted to go after charters. And in fact, CTA was the top spending lobbyist last year of all the interests, big oil, tobacco. CTA outspent them all, and the majority of their lobbying was spent toward pushing these bills through, and they got through. So that's why it's important for us to use our power of the vote to make sure that people who go to represent us at the state level aren't going to be controlled by special interests. They're going to vote the will of their community. Now, that typically tends to not be a problem for our valley areas because the representatives in our valley areas have been charter supporters, have been charter friendly. In fact, the Republican caucus unanimously bound together to vote against SB 98. And so it was actually pushed through entirely on the Democratic side. Now, I'm not taking a swipe at Democrats at all. I know and love lots of Democrats. It's just the charter school movement. It's interesting. The charter school movement should be something that is championed by the Democratic Party platform. It fits right in with all of their beliefs and ideals, but yet for some reason, the vast majority of Democratic legislators have not been charter friendly. And it's not lost on me the observation that the largest contributor to reelection campaigns and to lobbying is the California Teachers Association and they are not charter friendly. And so you do have this obvious coincidence that their lobbying is translating directly into some legislative results.
Very important.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jimmy. We have another question from Mr. James or Mr. Paul. Would you unmute yourself, please?
Yeah, I did want to say, speaking to that point, the California Teachers Association they're the most powerful political organization on the planet at this point. And a lot of that owes to because they represent teachers, they must be putting the needs of the children first, which is not the case. They're a union and they're putting the union first, which means they want less competition for those traditional public schools. But and speaking about the funding as well, even before SB 98, charter schools received less per pupil funding than the traditional public school because those districts that they're chartered through, they get a cut of that as well. So even before that, charter schools were doing in many cases a better job with less funding on a per student basis. And so that was already the case with SB 98. That has really impacted them because as COVID came in towards the tail end of the last school year, many of those traditional public schools were slow to adapt and prepare for the students. Charter schools were ready, snap of fingers, and they were moving already into virtual programs. They were set up they were better able to adapt. So many students were leaving to go to the better option at that point. And then many of them wanted to stay for the school year, but the schools aren't getting that funding. So while the charter schools are being shortchanged, you have all the schools where they have less enrollment this year. They're still receiving the same money they received last year for less students, which is, and I'll go out on a political limb here and just say that's stealing from the kids. They're stealing from those students because now those students are not able to, the schools that are servicing those students are not able to receive the funding that they are earning, while other schools are receiving the funding they are not earning. And so the funds always should follow the student. That's always been the case. It was SB 98 that did change that, so it no longer follows the student. And there are some independent study charter schools whom I work with quite a bit. I'm a vendor with many of those for my programs. And some students they are receiving half the funding that they received last year because the charter school did not want to turn those students away. But the funding that they would use for many of the extracurricular programs like what I offer, they're not able to do that anymore because their funding was cut. So they're receiving half the funding that they did last year on a per student basis. So yeah, it's so important to pay attention to what our representatives are voting for. And it really was right down party lines. And it was the Democrats that voted for it. So put that bill in, which was pretty much it was exactly what the California Teachers Association wanted. So they put it in place. And, I think it's important as voters, we start realizing we need to look past the name, because it says teachers in the name, that it's a union. First and foremost, they're protecting the best interest of the union. Teachers second, students in so much as it benefits the union. And that's pretty much, what we have to remember that. So just because it says that they sponsored something doesn't mean it's always good. We as voters, we need to make sure we're applying critical thinking to who we're voting for and paying attention to what our representatives are supporting as well. Because it makes a big difference.
Thank you, Mr. James. We're coming up to our time pretty shortly now. Does anyone else have a question, Frank?
Yeah, I just want to mention something. I think part of the problem is education-wise regarding these schools? Because until your presentation today, I thought most of these charter schools were, well, especially with the name of academy, I thought they were private schools. And I think that's probably misconception on a lot of the public, thinking they're private schools and they're getting funding being taken away from public schools. So I think you folks need to advertise more or get that out, that these schools are part of the public system. And, you know, a lot of people resent it if you think it's a public school getting, a private school getting funds taken off the public school. So I think that's part of the problem, because I don't have any young kids. You know, my kids are all way older. So I don't have any interest in, you know, worrying about academies and public schools and stuff, except for voting wise, you know, make sure that they get the money they need and not just keep blowing the money, you know, the way these politicians do. So I think it's an education thing. I think you might consider getting out there more and publicizing what these schools are, you know, because if you think it's a private school, you're going to probably be against it. And that's where a lot of these people are probably out there, and especially when you go into other areas like lower income areas. And I know some of them do have private academies and so on, but most of them don't. And I think people also say, oh, well, you know, they're taking the money from the poor people and giving it to the wealthier people who would have their kids in school. So that's just my perception.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Frank. Does anybody have any more questions before we move along? Okay. Well, thank you. We're going to move along. Thank you so much for joining us. A great presentation. Thank you. And know that the Temecula Sunrise Rotary Club is here for you. If we need to do an activity or a community service, let us know. We will keep you posted as well, so you could get your kids involved with us. And thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. And you're always welcome to join us via Zoom every Tuesdays at 7:30 in the morning.
Thank you very much.
Let's see. Now it's time for our inspirational closing quote. And Chris is going to share his inspirational quote with us today. Chris, you ready? Unmute yourself.
Second here.
Well, before he gets ready, we're going to pick next Tuesday's October's meeting. Who's going to share with us next Tuesday's quote? And we have selected, John G. Woo! Okay, are you ready, Chris?
I'm ready. I found it.
Okay, great.
This is from Marcus Aurelius. Never let the future disturb you. You will meet it, if you have to, with the same weapons of reason which today arm you against the present. Y'all look very confused.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Very nice. Thank you so much, Chris. And don't forget to send that to me so I could also post it on our Facebook. So all the September quotes will be going up on September the 30th for all of our members that shared with us their inspirational closing quotes. Thank you so much, and meeting adjourned.